Serious. What is the creepiest true story you know of that sends shivers down your spine? Part 2. Please do like, share, and subscribe. While driving 55 to 60 miles per hour down dark back roads one night, I saw a truck pulled over on the side of the road ahead. As I drove past it, a man ran out from behind it and attempted to punch my car. Yes, that's correct. He ran at and attempted to throw a punch at a vehicle traveling at freeway speed. It looked like he just missed by a few inches. I saw his face for a brief moment, and it was truly frightening. His eyes were bugged out, and he looked like he was snarling. Drugs are bad, okay? Happened to one of our pastors at church. His daughter wakes them up in the middle of the night and says a man at her window had a gun and told her to open it, and she said, "No, I'm telling my daddy," and went to them. They figure she had a nightmare and let her sleep with them for the night. Next morning, he looks around outside her window and sees signs that someone had in fact been there, maybe even taken a screen down, and that she had been telling the truth. My ex-wife and I woke up in the middle of the night to find all our lights out in the house. We had not lost power. The living room light that we always leave on overnight had been turned off. The bathroom nightlight was removed and placed under the sink. The computer had been unplugged, and the monitor cord was unplugged and neatly folded on the desk. All of the doors and windows in the house were unlocked, undamaged, and standing wide open. Our bedroom door was wide open, and the TV we always fall asleep to was turned off. Nothing was taken. Our cats were both hiding behind the refrigerator and stayed there for most of the next day. Whenever someone came and knocked at the door, our large cat would start to growl and stare at the door from then on. She no longer does this after we moved. We had a couple of other mildly strange things that happened in context with that same apartment as well. I had a family friend's house get broken into. We lived in the rural Appalachian Mountains. She lived alone, and someone had wiggled open her back window while she was out. When she got home, she saw that the window was slightly open, and the dishes on the counter in front of it had been moved. She backs out of the house and called the sheriff. The police clear the house and make sure it's safe. The only things missing were the spare key to the house. The intruder had also unloaded her pistol she kept in the nightstand. It would have been better if they had stolen something. We could just call them a son of a bitch and moved on. This, however, was a different kind of unsettling. She refused to move out because of a stalker. She was in her early 30s and was not going to be intimidated, so we changed the locks and put motion lights. The sheriff did drive-bys for a while. Her friends and family made a habit of hanging out on her porch into the late night. We would drink, smoke, and meet there before and after going out. It really became a gathering point for everyone, even after the suspicious passed. We never heard any more from the stalker. I like to think that between her being extra careful and so many people looking out for her, he never got the chance and moved on. TLDR. The fact that he only took the key sends shivers down my spine. He didn't want money, valuables, or even the free gun he unloaded. He wanted her. The Matthew Hoffman murders. This girl and her brother come home from school one day to find the inside of their house essentially painted in blood. A man snuck into their house and killed the kid's mother and her friend. When they came in the door, the murderer, Matthew Hoffman, heard them and grabbed the brother. Sarah, the girl, hid under her bed until Matthew found her. He then tied her up in a blanket and locked her in the basement for a few hours. She heard him kill the dog because it was barking too much. After a few hours, Matthew came back down into the basement and grabbed her and loaded her up into the back of his Jeep. She was laying on top of her family's bodies that were stuffed into trash bags. Matthew would later dump the bodies into an old oak tree that he had spent months carving out. He kept Sarah for a few days locked in his basement and fed her squirrel meat and sour milk. There are some different stories on how they found out he had her, but one of them was a cop pulled him over as he was driving home from the murders for speeding. Matthew told the cop that his wife, Sarah, was sick at home. The craziest thing out of this whole incident to me is that they found the bodies in that tree less than a mile from my wife's house. That's about 30 miles from the murders. Anyways, they found the girl and the bodies, and the guy went to jail for the rest of his life. During high school, we had a female teacher who was in a kind of failing marriage. One night, she came home and her husband had prepared a bath for her, surrounded by candles and rose petals and all that shit. She was pleasantly surprised, as it seems awfully romantic of him. He told her to get in, and he covered her eyes with a washcloth and started massaging her. Then, all of a sudden, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. The guy had grabbed a huge knife and stabbed her. She was able to get away and survive the harrowing experience. He just made a fucking trap for her and was going to murder her. She got away? The murder of Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom. True story. Heinously fucked up. Some highlights from that Fuck Thatsville. Channon Gail Christian, 21, and Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., 23, were an unmarried couple from Knoxville, Tennessee. They were kidnapped the evening of January 6, 2007, when Christian's vehicle was carjacked and taken to a rental house where they were raped, tortured, and murdered. Newsom's body was discovered near a set of nearby railroad tracks. He had been bound, blindfolded, and gagged, and stripped naked from the waist down. He had been shot in the back of the head, neck, and back, and his body had been set on fire. According to the testimony of the Knox County acting medical examiner, Dr. Darnica Milsinek-Polchin, at the trial of Eric Boyd, Newsom was sodomized with an object and raped by a person. The medical examiner said that Channon died after hours of torture, suffering injuries to her vagina, anus, and mouth in repeated sexual assaults. Bleach was poured down her throat and used to scrub her body while she was still alive in an attempt by her attackers to remove DNA evidence. She was bound with curtains and strips of bedding, her face covered with a trash bag, and her body stashed in 5 large trash bags. These were placed inside a residential waste disposal unit and covered with sheets. The medical examiner said there was evidence that Channon slowly suffocated to death. The people who did it were caught and convicted and are all in some prison or other, which is great and all, but it's not going to untorture and unrape the victims. Just imagine how terrifying that night must have been, from leaving the apartment to go to a party, to being confronted by a group of 5 thugs who were probably armed, panicked, shocked into compliance, stuffed into your own SUV, and the last hours of your life are horrific from that moment on. Gives me shivers. A family friend was living in Israel with her family. Shortly after moving to a new house, she started hearing voices. No one believed her, and she started seeing doctor after doctor because they couldn't find anything technically wrong with her, and she had no other symptoms. This went on for months, and sometimes she was totally fine. Other times, she would start hearing the voices again. Last summer, they discovered a terror tunnel under her house. A ton of these were discovered at the time. For a year, they'd been moving people and cargo through it, directly under her living room, and the voices she'd been hearing were very real. A little late to the party, but this only happened a few months ago. It sounds like it's straight out of a Lifetime original movie. A little backstory. This woman and her daughter moved to Springfield, Missouri after losing their home in Hurricane Katrina. Nice people. The daughter was handicapped and wheelchair bound. They lived in a home built by Habitat for Humanity and were well liked by the neighbors. Well, no one had heard from the woman or daughter in a few days, but thought nothing of it until a post showed up on the mother and daughter shared Facebook page. The post said, "This bitch is dead, LOL." Friends began commenting on it, hoping it's someone joking around, and the OP replied to the concerned friend, paraphrasing here, "I sliced that fat bitch and raped her sweet, innocent little girl." The police were called, and the mother and daughter were placed on an endangered persons list because of the threatening nature of the posts. Police arrive at the house and find the mother stabbed to death and no sign of the daughter anywhere. Her wheelchairs had been left behind, and money had been stolen from a safe in the house. The next day, the girl was found safe in Wisconsin with who early reports said was her boyfriend. With a quick look at a map, you would know that Wisconsin is a 10-plus hour trip from Springfield, Missouri, longer than it took to locate the girl after posts were made and police were notified. Something doesn't seem right. The girl is walking fine without her wheelchair and speaking normal, as opposed to earlier reports of her being severely disabled and unable to walk or communicate normally. After an interview with the boyfriend's stepfather, reports are released stating that the girl had been there for a few days and the stepfather knew nothing of her disability. She and his stepson had met each other online. To make this horribly long story a lot shorter, I'll cut to the chase. The daughter asked the boyfriend to murder her mother so they could be together. They had stolen money from a safe in the house, bought new clothes in town, and took a bus to Wisconsin, where the daughter then made the 2 awful posts to Facebook so her mother's body would be found. Once the girl and her boyfriend were arrested, new information was given by the daughter. Her mother had been helping her fake her illness or disability for years. They were not victims of Hurricane Katrina. They had been lying to people for years and accepting money from local charities and businesses. The craziest thing about this is that the lies probably would have kept going if the mom hadn't been murdered. TLDR, mother-daughter pair had been conning people for years faking disability. Daughter convinces online boyfriend to visit and murder her mother, thus exposing all the lies. It happened to me many years ago, yet I still get shivers thinking about what could have happened. Years ago, I was home from university and was spending the evening with my girlfriend. We were feeling a little frisky, but since we were home from college at our parents' houses, we decided to go for a little drive. Our hometown was fairly rural, so it didn't take much time for us to drive out somewhere on a country road near an alfalfa field where we could have some privacy. Hardly anyone drove past here, maybe 1 truck every hour or so. So the engine is off, the lights are off, and our seats are reclined. My car was small, so there wasn't any room to get in the back and really go at it, but tenderness is tenderness, whether there's a stick shift between you or not. But that night, I'm glad I had to stay in the driver's seat. Just as things begin to get real heated, I see some headlights in the rearview mirror coming up the road. That's not a big deal, so I toned down the action a bit, waiting for it to pass. But as the truck got closer, its headlights suddenly went dark. My girlfriend wasn't totally aware of it yet, but I pulled away a bit out of curiosity. Then I heard the coasting, gravelly crunch of the vehicle pulling off onto the gravel behind us. It was dark there, no streetlights or anything to go by, but with what moon there was, I could barely make out the outline of a truck behind us. No cab lights, no running engine. I asked my girlfriend if her door was locked. This stopped her dead in her tracks. She said it was, and asked why I told her there was someone behind us, parked in the gravel. She immediately straightened herself up, and I put my seat back up, never taking my eyes off the mirror. Then, I saw the driver's side door to the truck open. The cab light still didn't turn on in the truck, and I never saw anyone get out, but that was my sign to nope out of there. I told my girlfriend we needed to leave now, which she replied quickly, okay. 2. I started up the vehicle, and trying my best not to spin out in the gravel, drove as fast as I could onto the road. We drove in silence for about 2 minutes, heading back towards town, when I noticed that I could not see the sky clearly behind the vehicle. We were being followed. The truck still did not turn on its headlights, but it was tailgating me very closely. I calmly informed my girlfriend that they were behind us, but that we had plenty of gas, and we'd get back to town just fine, no big deal. She said, okay, in that little voice again, and went silent, glancing back every so often. This continued for about 2 minutes, and I briefly considered calling the police before the headlights behind me flared on. The truck revved its engine, pulled into the other lane. We were still on a 2-lane asphalt country road, and hauled past me like a bat out of hell. I felt like I should take her home at this point, but the last thing I wanted was for those assholes to follow us to where she lived. Whoever they were, they made me uneasy. I told her as much, and she agreed. We wove a flighty path through several nice neighborhoods before pulling into a nice cul-de-sac where we could sit and wait to see if the truck was still around. We never saw the truck again that night, but our cul-de-sac time did give us the opportunity to have the intimate time we had been wanting, all the more intense due to constantly watching to make sure we were safe. Looking back, I'm sure it was some country farm people who were just used to catching kids making out near their fields. They probably wanted to bang on our windows and give us a good scare for fun, but I have to wonder why they followed us for so long, and why they passed us the way they did. Were they out there for a joyride, looking for some entertainment? I fear the worst, but am grateful as hell for my cramped little Honda I drove. A teacher was telling us about a time she went with her friends to an unoccupied house that was said to be haunted out in the middle of nowhere. her and 3 friends. When they got there, the doors were locked and the blinds were down, so they couldn't get in and they couldn't see through the windows. They decided to picnic in front of the house. 2 hours later, a friend looked back at the house and noticed that every single blind was open, and so was the door. It had happened so slowly that no one noticed. Again, no one lived there. Okay, so it was 2010. I remember this because I'd stayed up to watch the Stereophonics perform at the Vancouver Winter Olympics. It was roughly 3 a.m. in the morning and my parents were out. Only me, 16 at the time, and my brother Dan, 15, in the house. So it's late, 3 a.m. Me and Dan are in the living room watching TV and playing Warrior Kings on the PC, waiting for the band to come on, when all of a sudden, we both hear a crash come from the kitchen. We are kids at the time, in the UK, so I can't go fetch my 12 gauge or grab a Glock. We were freaked out and just looked at each other, knowing full well that there was nobody home but us two. So we both creep into the hallway and stand looking at the closed kitchen door, waiting to see if anyone comes out. That's when I whisper or whimper to Dan to go get the snooker cues on the weapon or some sort. After Dan sneaked off and returned with 2 snooker cues, we took a deep breath in and opened the kitchen door, not knowing what to expect, but thinking the worst. We throw the door wide open and just run straight into the room to see that there's absolutely nobody in there. The only strange thing is that the bin had been torn apart. Its lid was on the other side of the kitchen, the base was broken in 2, and there was rubbish strewn out everywhere. We have no pets, no cat flaps, the doors and windows were locked, and the only 2 people in the house were sitting together in the same room. To this day, I can't explain the happening that took place on the 20th of February 2010, the night of the rabid rubbish receptacle. This happened to one of my best friends in high school when he was a kid. I asked his mom about it later, and she independently confirmed her side of the story. For a whole week, when my friend was 5 years old, his grandpa came into his room after his mom turned the lights out and tickled him till my friend was giddy and fell asleep. He didn't think much about it, even though his grandpa lived clear across the country. When his grandpa didn't come to tickle him one night, he asked his mom what happened. Why didn't grandpa visit the night before? She asked why he was asking. He told her, but she didn't say anything right away. Days later, she finally broke down and told him that his grandpa had been sick and in the hospital for a long time, and that he had died the day before he'd asked her that fateful question. 10 years ago, I did a summer abroad in Hong Kong. It's a 12-hour time difference from where I lived in the States. My family and I are close, so we would try to talk regularly as we could, which was 8 a.m. or 8 p.m., as those were the easiest times to talk since it was the opposite of each other. Well, one morning, my dad tried to call me and couldn't get a hold of me. He got bummed and got in his car. For whatever reason, he felt compelled to try and call me one more time. I can't remember if we talked, but he left about 10 seconds after he decided to try again. My hometown has a mountain you need to go over to go to the neighboring town where my dad works. He got to the base of the mountain and watched the worst tragedy my town has ever known unfold in front of him. An 18-wheeler truck, brakes broken going downhill. It crashed into around a dozen cars before crashing into a local business, killing everyone in the cars. My dad would have been hit in it had he not tried to call me just one more time. Thanks God.